Hey guys, boys podcast episode 4, and no, it's not episode 4, it's episode 5 now. Because I've just been used to this busy schedule. I mean, I was supposed to be relaxing during this COVID-19 crisis and everything, but I'm surprised that we're actually getting so far into it though. But we got a new guest here, and it's none other than the Club Pell Droid co-founder and a very good friend of mine. We go back way back. It's Jordan Jones. Jordan, how's it going, pal?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How about you, Rhys?
Not too bad, mate. Not too bad. We're surviving as always and missing football. It's killing us off, man.
Yeah, it's just I can't believe that it's just ended like that as well. Now, but at least we know how the season's ended and everything. And I imagine safety is what means the most to everyone at the moment.
Of course it is, of course, and safety always comes first. Human lives do matter. And going on with more current situations, we always got to stick together. Because it's what's best for the future. But let's get down to it. Let's talk about football positively now, and let's just get right into it. So you're the co-founder of Club Pell Droid. Tell me, what's Club Pell Droid? What is it? Just go into details of how it all started and where it's at now.
So a Club Pell Droid started in 2015, and it was more or less where I was a Cardiff City fan. I'm still a Cardiff City fan now, but basically I'd always had an interest in Welsh domestic football, not to the extent that I have it now. In that I'd watch Scoria every now and then. If there was a live game going on, I would dabble into it. Perhaps on a Monday I'd watch a highlights program. But for me then, back in say the start of 2010, so I was more Cardiff City driven. It was always Cardiff City. And then after I completed my college course in 2014, I didn't really know what to do. So more or less, I took a year out. And then this is where I wanted to start in the media really. So I had a bit of work experience, more or less just shadowing at the BBC for a week. And then I started doing stuff on Cardiff City, but then I thought, why not make a website or a page perhaps? So the Club Pell Droid started as a page really, where it was just a central hub. You see Twitter pages set up really, and all I was doing, I was just sharing what everyone else was sharing. So it was just clubs announcing signings, clubs announcing managers, stuff like that. So I made a page, and I would do graphics, just seeing fixtures and results, just trying to make a page that everyone could go to, as such. And then a year later, we actually made a website. It's not what the website looks like now, but it was more or less just a few articles here and there, really, that would just do what was on social media, really. And then what has gone on then is, since a year later, is that in 2016, that's the big buzz, really, the big boom in Welsh football because of the Euros and everything, where people were taking an interest in Welsh domestic football as well. So I thought there was interesting stories to tell in Welsh domestic football. So we put it on the web. We made our own website, a better website, and people were donating to it. So, for example, Cardiff Met goalkeeper Will Fuller donated money towards the website actually starting. And that fundraiser then that we had allowed us to grow the website a bit. We started growing, and we had more contributors as such joining on. It wasn't as structured as it was back then, so as it is now. So back then, it wasn't as structured, and we weren't working perhaps on a professional basis. But now I think we're as professional as we can really be.
Oh, fair play to you. So how did you all construct it to get donations running in? Did you start up a Patreon page? Did you start with how did you get the financing? I know you said you got donations from players, fans, and everything, but how did that start for you? Did you, like I said, did you start a Patreon page, or what did you start it with?
So initially, the website was in its early stages, so we didn't even have a domain, so it was basically a clubpelldroid.wordpress.com, and we were just doing articles here and there, and then we reached the maximum quota that you could actually use for images, because photographers were being kind to us, and they were allowing us to use their images. We were doing articles here and there, and then Nick Davis helped along, and we looked at domain names, so that's how clubpelldroid.org came about, and we started professionalizing the website, really. So basically we put up, I think it was a Just Giving or a GoFundMe, where we basically said like, we want to make a hub for Welsh football, really, like, but we can't do this for free now. We need some kind of money that is going to help us. So people started donating to it. They were just like donating stuff here and there. I think it was like £80 or something we had raised, maybe less, maybe a bit more, and that more or less like helped us then pay for the domain, pay for hosting, because for us even now, like that's the biggest cost for us is every year that you've got to pay money towards hosting a website. It's not cheap anymore, especially for us now.
So with that in mind, you got Club Pell Droid now. It's run professionally by the likes of yourself and others. You must have had a few guest or people, players, staff, and everything that you've interviewed in the past. Which one would you say was the best person you've ever interviewed in your recent run with Club Pell Droid?
There was, so in January, I myself won an award for journalistic endeavour, in the Nick Machin Prize, and you had to submit a few articles that you felt you were proud of, and the ones that brought it up, and it was recently discussed on the Cymru League's podcast between Gavin Chesterfield and Jamie Thomas, and basically last year when Cardiff Metropolitan and Barry had qualified for Europe, I thought, wow, this is great because both of these teams are on my doorstep, and that's how my interest in Welsh football started, really, was because of Cardiff Metropolitan being on my doorstep. But going back to my best interview, so I interviewed Gav, and I interviewed Gav a few times as such, but this time last year when I was previewing content for the Europa League, I interviewed Gav, and one of his stories was how he nearly never became manager of Barrytown, and I don't think that's actually been reported elsewhere other than us doing that article, and then the Cymru League's podcast told that. So that was an interview that I enjoyed. There's been a few feature pieces as such. Trying to think off the top of my head, so like last year was a father and son going head together in the Welsh Cup. Now the Welsh Cup is one of the most illustrious competitions in world football. I think it's the third or fourth oldest in the world, and to have a story like that and be able to tell it, that's the stories that I kind of enjoy.
Was that Lee Kendall? It was that Lee Kendall's story, the father and son in the Welsh Cup.
That was Merthyr Saints against Quar Park Rangers. So it was low down in the competition, but the interviews have really differed from, say, like the start of the website to where they are now, because we're getting more access. So clubs and players understand that since we've grown, their exposure can now grow as well. The Welsh Cup features are always the best for me. I really enjoy just putting a bit more coverage onto the Welsh Cup in the early stages, because you kind of get it for the Cymru Premier as such in the third round. You kind of get stuff like that. But like in the early rounds, when you're interviewing people and you're trying to source stories, that's where I think I get my better interviews. Off the top of my head, like I can't really think there's many other interviews that I've enjoyed, but I do think there actually are more out there as well.
What about the worst experience, though? I mean, there's probably not a lot because, hard work, and practice makes perfect and everything. But what do you think was in some case, the worst experience or the worst guest you've ever had to interview, or the experience of traveling to a certain game?
I think for the worst experience, it was just the early stages of the website where I didn't have it in my mind that we should be like live blogging games and stuff. That's where I think like that's where we've grown, is that we used to be amateurish, really. At the time, I think I was at Barry versus Goitre United when they'd been promoted, and I was recording their goals on the phone. But obviously, broadcasting rights go to Rondo and S4C, so I was recording that. And then basically, they were headhunting me to search me down. The FAW to say like to take that down. But that's not like, it's my worst experience. It was also a good experience as well, because basically I was recording them, uploaded them to the Club Pell Droid social media accounts, and then from that, we actually got like a bit more advice from Gwyn Derville, the secretary for the league, because he said like, "Are you paying for entry for grounds?" And I was paying for entry for grounds, and then he said like, "You should apply for accreditation." And then since that meeting at the Barry game, that's where we've been able to professionalise really. For some interviews, it is hard to like try and draw out like some good content, because sometimes you can come away from interviews and you don't feel like you've really got much to say really. But I think those interviews come from just players or managers watching television and seeing loads of people just being media trained and not giving much away really. But it's been more good than bad really, I imagine, because at a Welsh League level they want to offer a bit more. There's more of a human element to it, because I think it means more to them kind of, because it's an amateur, semi-professional, professional at sometimes level.
Oh, right. See, I mean, I always find when I'm looking back as a supporter now, I'll be talking more about my experience in Welsh League football in the podcast in the long run, because James Clements, I'm sure you've heard of him. You know, him and I have always gone on to podcasts with not just this one, but the Yellow and Blue Army podcast or radio show with Bro Radio, and other bits and pieces I've done. I've always gone on and said the best moments or the best experience I've had was in Welsh League football, especially following Barry Town. And I want to talk about, you know, the whole concept idea of the Welsh League. Or it's not just that, just Welsh football in general. It doesn't have to be about international level. I mean, episode 3, when I interviewed Leighton Maxwell, who is, I see now, is a good friend of mine, because he's friends with my dad's friends, and the way that Caldrax are doing. I mean, you and I both know we both invested into the club by paying for one of the seats. So I want to talk more about the Welsh League, and especially mention a bit of Caldrax. What was the reason for you to invest your money with Caldrax when it came to purchasing a seat then? What was your reason?
So no, I haven't actually bought one yet, but I advertised it on social media, basically, because I just thought like during these times clubs are still allowed to do some kind of ground improvements. It's not to say I won't, by the way, buy a seat for the Caldrax, and I'll go on to that in a bit. But for me, I just wanted to advertise the good work of what people are doing during these times, because I've recently done a documentary on STM Sports for university, and that was highlighting how hard it is to get these facilities in place. But you've got to also praise the clubs that are getting their facilities in place, because it's a costly thing to erect a 100-seater stand at an amateur or semi-professional level, really. But it shows like the community aspect of Welsh football, really, is that people are coming together and they're supporting it. And for me as well, Cardiff Draconians. So growing up, I literally lived in the flats opposite their ground. Like that was how close I was to Cardiff Dracs. That I didn't realise at the time, obviously. But then after that, I'd moved house, and I wasn't even that far from the Dracs ground again. It wasn't until recently that I started following and watching the Dracs, and I wouldn't. I'd say they're a club that I always looked out for their results, because it's kind of like that element from my childhood stuff as well. But it's good to see that as well. And going back to Leighton Maxwell, I remember interviewing him in their early days as well, when they were going through the leagues, and I thought like, wow, this is someone who scored a goal at Anfield for Liverpool. So like, if I'm securing people like that, that's a high profile name, kind of, and you get views off of that.
Well, it's because with me, I want to speak highly of Cardiff Draconians as well, because my dad played for him as well. But this is going back years and years ago, before even where Cardiff Dracs and now. You looked at Cardiff Dracs back then as a pub league team, as they were necessarily called. And my dad used to play for him. He played a lot of games for him as well. And as well that the current players, apart from Leighton Maxwell was managing, but Darren, who's sort of the assistant manager for Caldrax Dracs, he's a friend of my dad's, and some of the players are friends of my father. So I used to go to the games when I was a kid as well, and having to watch this club that's grown so much over the years, it just makes you feel proud. And that's one of the reasons why I donated, giving some of my money to get a seat for them, because when I spoke to Leighton and he gave me the full reason why they're doing it and everything, I thought, well, they deserve it, so here's something I'm going to give back, So I'm going to wish them all the very best with Cardiff Draconians as well. So let's talk about the current state now with the JD Cymru Premier. I keep saying I was almost going to say the Welsh Premier League now, but I got to try and say Cymru Premier to be more of a PC now with because they've changed the names. But with the current situation now that the league has stopped, Connors Key are now champions, and Andy Morrison is party mad with the karaoke. And Mike Harris is having a fit with all this finalised agreement, whatever. But what's your opinion on the JD Cymru Premier stopping and giving the title to Connors Key?
So in the early stages of the outbreak, I always wanted to wait and see if it could ever be resumed on the pitch. And over time, as things worsened, and I think April was the worst, I think, scientifically. I just came to the idea that the season isn't going to be concluded on the pitch. So the best way to do it was points per game. So I do agree with the way that the season ended in regards to the points per game. And you're going to have some kind of stories where lower down the leagues, teams haven't played as many games, but they've won games and not lost many. And they've been crowned champions, for example. I do agree it's the right decision to end the season at this point, and I can understand it from both sides because obviously the new Saints are the top dogs of Welsh football. So for them to lose their crown and not be able to defend it in the way that they feel they could have done, maybe that'll hurt them. But there's also other clubs affected by it who have missed out on European spots, and obviously relegation and promotion haven't been decided yet either. I do agree with it though. I do feel that Connors Key would have probably gone on to win the league if COVID-19 never existed, just because of how strong they were throughout the whole season. And I will say it's refreshing perhaps to see a new champion of the league, because if you're an outside viewer of Welsh football, you probably see New Saints dominate the league time and time again. So you want to see perhaps something differ really, and then it brings a bit of excitement to Welsh football as well.
Do you know, with I want to talk to you about that with the outside viewers of Welsh football, because you've taken a liking to Welsh domestic football, but there are other situations where there's people who slander the Welsh League for no apparent reason. Have you ever gone into, I wouldn't say heated debates, I would say, have you gone into any discussions or debates with people where they're slandering the good name of Welsh domestic football for no apparent reason? I mean, you yourself, you're a Cardiff City fan, but you've taken a liking and respect for the league for what it was. And me and James talked about this in episode 2, where, I, for one, I'm against. I mean, I'm all for Cardiff fans, Swansea fans for supporting Welsh clubs in the English leagues. But then the response that the Welsh domestic football gets, where they're saying it's rubbish or it's shit or it's this, it's that, and there's not really a justification for them to say that. What's your approach to that negative response that the Welsh domestic football gets?
For me, I don't think it deserves the bad rep that it gets, but I do think the situation actually is improving. So as it stands, obviously, as I mentioned, I'm a Cardiff City fan, but for me right now, I gave up getting a season ticket at the start of this season. It wasn't due to Cardiff City getting relegated. It was more for me wanting to focus on Welsh domestic football. So for me, I don't think it deserves a bad rep. Obviously, things can be improved in the league, but really, I think we're in a good place at the moment. The only thing that's lacking for me is the crowds. Really, is that for me, I want to go to a Welsh domestic game and I want it to feel like there's something riding on the game. So having a bit more atmosphere. That's why I wrote an article like when I went to Barry Carnarvon. I like the idea of two strong clubs, was two clubs with a strong backing and that having chance and everything. That's what I feel is missing at the moment in Welsh domestic football. Is perhaps the crowds aren't the best, but for me the problem comes in that obviously the league isn't promoting enough in perhaps the general consumption of Wales, and not enough people know what's going on, and that's where the Club Pell Droid has to fill the gap. Really, in regards to discussions, I'm always of the belief that clubs like Merthyr Town should be playing in the Welsh Pyramid system, and it is their decision as it stands to continue to play in the English Pyramid system. But I just feel that perhaps Merthyr Town would be better suited in Wales, because I feel like for a stronger pyramid structure, we've got to have our better teams. It may be hypocritical for me to say that as a Cardiff City fan, whose team currently plays in the second tier of English football. But I've been the idea that I would like to include all of the exiled teams at the moment. So I've suggested, for example, like Cardiff City should be playing, could play their under-23s in the Nathaniel MG Cup or something, similar to the Secretary Trophy in Swansea City as well. So that's what I've had, really, is that I just believe that we should try and get as many Welsh teams playing in the Welsh pyramid system and promote Wales for what it is, really. The standards improving. I think it's a great league for development as well. So I feel at the moment the Cymru Premier is a great league for development, because these clubs are giving their younger players, for example, like Barry had a few Cardiff City players this season, so did Penabon, and they've had first team experience. So that's where I see the Cymru Premier at the moment, and I don't think it should be hammered, really, in that there's loads of people who are working on a volunteer basis to make a national league what it is, and there's so many good stories that come out of Welsh football as well.
Do you think the FAW as well, you were talking about with supporters, trying to, a lot of clubs need to get backing from strong supporters, especially where you've got the likes of Barry and Carnarvon who have got that, even though sometimes I do feel that Barry needs a bit more because we're situated 7 miles away from Cardiff City Football Club. But do you think the FAW themselves need to realise that they need to invest more in their own national league itself? Because I've had many conversations with a lot of people who have said the same thing, that, yeah, it needs a bit more investment, because without that league, the Welsh national football team or international football team wouldn't have played in FIFA competitive or even UEFA competitive sport. Do you agree? Do you think that the FAW should be investing in more?
I do think they do what they can, really. It has to be remembered that even there's always a debate whether football and rugby is the biggest sport in Wales, for example, and rugby is probably the biggest sport in regards to its outreach as such. This is what you've seen in national media and stuff like that. I think the FAW do what they can, and they offer through their other sister companies, for example, ground improvements and stuff like that. I think there's more down to our national media as such to promote the game, really. And I think more clubs need to buy in and understand that people do care about the leagues as well. So that, I'm not saying that clubs don't do that. So if I go to a game and they've made recent signings, I would like that to be announced on social media. And I think it's more the clubs need to put more on social media so we understand more of who they are. And a good example of this is when I was doing the Europa League coverage last year, as their social media officer, Abby, gave us a list of all of their players. Obviously, we knew who they were, but there was more stuff to it. So she put a list for Will Evans and Emlyn Lewis had worked on a farm, for example, and came from farmlands and that. So my whole story was basically like, you've gone from farmlands to now playing in the Europa League, stuff like that. I can see why. I'm a national team supporter. I always want the Welsh national team to do well, but I also see what the domestic league offers. I think more rules in chase. So I've always made this discussion. I have made this discussion on Twitter, and I've asked a few about it. But Welsh clubs need more financial support. And basically, for me, I've had this discussion with a few clubs, is that Cymru and Clwb have a successful academy. So, for example, in England, in regards to academy players, you could nurture a player, but you get a sell-on fee kind of, Ampadu and Chelsea and Exeter, for example. So for me, Welsh domestic clubs, if they bring through this player that comes through the system, and then they get taken, for example, by Cardiff, Swansea or Wrexham, and I think there should be a bit more financial support for the Welsh domestic clubs that have brought through these players, because you've seen it with Cardiff City, is that they've lost Rabi Matondo for peanuts, and then he's gone to Man City and then Schalke for a big amount of money. So that's where I feel where more money needs to be in place, because more money is being invested in Welsh academies now, and that's what I want. I want to see Welsh players from the Welsh domestic system going on to play for the Welsh national team or playing at a higher standard. And you can see that with players like Ben Cabango, who had a stint at the New Saints, for example, And what Barry and Penabont have done this season really is that's got to be in place, but it's up to the clubs really as well. And I understand it's hard for the clubs because it's more on an amateur, semi-professional basis, so you've got to find those volunteers as well. But yeah, I do think more needs to be done from everyone really, the national media, a bit more from the FAW, but a bit more from the clubs as well.
Yeah, I see a lot of changes as well because there's if you look at Connah's Quay now, they're pushing. I think, are they professional now, or are they turning professional soon? Because I heard that there's plannings for Connah's Quay to turn professional. I think now with this Champions League run or a Champions League game, if they get under their belt, then it gives them a bit more financial backing end to go professional. So, and there's like Barry now. I mean, I've heard one or two things where they're pushing for professionalism again. I've heard Ballard, they want to push it a bit more. So there's a lot of clubs out there as well. I mean, if you look at Caldrax and there's other clubs, not just in the Cymru Premier, but from leagues down, they're improving on their grounds, they're improving on their squads because they want to push for more, a better future and better success. It's going to take time. It's going to be slow. But I want to mention just one club that's sort of slowly getting there, but I feel like they need to improve more. And you've mentioned them already because you said you've done a documentary. It's STM Sports. STM Sports, I mean, I give them a lot of credit. You know, they've gone so far. I always feel like they're professional, and even though they're some of them are semi-professionals and everything. Do you think STM Sports need to change a lot for the future? I mean, where they're playing or how they're playing, or do you think that STM Sports need to change in order to better themselves in the future?
So from recording the documentary, the point was always their ground really, and it comes back to it really, is that for some clubs they're going to be victims of these new changes coming into place, and I'm fully for the idea of professionalising Welsh football and bringing up the standards and the seats and that. And when some clubs will say, "Oh, we don't fill our ground. Why do we need a 250-seat stand?" But my argument to that is that get to where you want to be, get 250 fans there. And clubs like Ammanford have shown that can be possible. They put in floodlight in and stands and everything, and they've got the best crowds in the league. I did something on them for my dissertation, and that's the role reverse of it. Is that clubs have got to try and adapt, and there's going to be clubs that are going to fall to the wayside and have to sink or swim, really. They'll have to decide, do we play parks football or do we try and professionalise things? For STM Sports themselves, I really enjoyed doing that documentary, and I sympathise with them so much because they really did have their hands tied behind their back in regards to what they couldn't do, really, because I think the belief was that they always wanted to stay at Llanrumney, but obviously they don't own their grounds, whereas other clubs do own their ground, and they could have put in the improvements that were needed. On the pitch, I can't take anything away from them. I genuinely think, like, wow, what a story. They literally gone from Parks football to a National Cup final. And they finished in the top 5 of the Cymru South, the highest league finish. And there's so many good players there that I've been told that they don't pay players, and I believe that. I genuinely think that, like, they do it for the fun of it. And that is mad, because they've managed to attract some Cymru Premier players to go join them, players that could be playing on a higher level, really, but they play for the enjoyment of it.
So I've got a couple more questions before we conclude this podcast anyway, but the amount of clubs that we mentioned, you know, it's exciting times for them. But in your opinion, I'll give you 5 football clubs now, whether not in the Cymru Premier, it could be either in Cymru North or Cymru South, or even lower. Which 5 clubs do you see achieving great success in the future and becoming Cymru Premier clubs in the future?
So for me, Penabont, I think I've got a great potential to be one of those teams that stays in the Cymru Premier and then kicks on. I think to have a manager like Rhys Griffiths, who seems so driven, and the stuff that he really wanted to professionalise things even when everyone else couldn't, and to have someone like Rhys Griffiths at the club trying to professionalise things, bringing in good players and working with Cardiff City, for example, I see them actually doing well. Clwb Bay, I think, are actually going to be a club that, coming back from the English pyramid system to the Welsh pyramid system, that I think that they'll go from strength to strength. It hasn't worked out for them this season because Prestatyn Town have been so good, so they've missed out on promotion. But they've got plans in place to become a Cymru Premier club. So imagine that was their ambition, really. Swansea University is another one. They'll be devastated that they couldn't have gone up to the Cymru Premier because they failed on the licence. But that's another team that's gone through the Welsh pyramid system and risen up, really. And I think, as I said in the documentary, you might not see that anymore. You might not see teams go through the Welsh pyramid system at such a rate now because there's going to be so much stuff in place. So stories of STM and Swansea Uni happened because there wasn't as much measures in place. Amford's another club that have got so much ambitions, and I'm perhaps being a bit South Wales centric here, but that's just generally on the information that I get in with stuff as well. To attract someone like Lee Trundle and Robinson, and that just shows that you can attract good players as well. Really, I'm trying to think of other clubs as well, perhaps lower down the pyramid, and we've obviously said about Cardiff, Drax and that, but I think it's more the teams that are going to go in from currently playing at tier 3 or going to just below tier 3 but aiming for tier 3, because I think a lot of clubs are trying to put plans in together to become one of those clubs that I've listed, really.
So you mentioned Lee Trundle as well, and I'm actually glad you mentioned him because he was going to be the next mention on this podcast. With Lee Trundle, he's played in total over 7 Welsh clubs. He's been a tremendous asset, not for these Welsh clubs, but for Welsh football in general. How would you describe Lee Trundle's contribution to Welsh football as a whole?
I think he's added a bit more exposure to it, and that's what's needed, really, is that because obviously he was such a good player for Swansea City, tricks and skills, stuff like that. He was on Soccer and Showboat, and that the people knew Lee Trundle. So he was one of those Football League cult heroes, and that following's kind of followed to Ammanford. So I've had a few people message me and be like, do you know when Ammanford are playing next? I'd like to go down. And I imagine the sole factor of that is that Lee Trundle, really, is that players like Lee Trundle and Andy Robinson are putting the bums on seats because people want to see them. And it's a testament to Lee Trundle that he's, I think, 43 now. He's in his 40s, but he's still maintaining that professionalism. He's in great shape to play in the Cymru leagues and that as well. So it shows that he's added so much to it as well. So I think he started off with Llanelli when he came back to Welsh football. And that's when it's kind of started, really. He's moved around to a few clubs, but everywhere that he's gone, he's added a bit more exposure to them.
The one club he played for, one of the Welsh clubs he's played for, and I want to go back into like you said, about the standards of Welsh League football and everything, but the one club he played for was Neath Football Club. And I think it was a tragic story for that football club, because I thought there was a lot of high expectations for that club, because they were going to go on to bigger and better success, because they were going to be the ones to compete against the likes of the New Saints, Bangor at the time, Rhyl and Llanelli, were all 4 of them were sort of fighting for the Welsh Premier League title after Barry's tragic relegation, and financial despair. But with Neath Football Club, it's one of those football clubs where it's sad for them to fold, but that's what the consequences of Welsh domestic football features, because if you haven't got the license or you haven't got that big finance backing, it's tragic. But what is your opinion on Neath Football Club, or do you know much about that club to say something about them?
I wouldn't say I could comment too much on it, but I do understand perhaps if you add that to the current climate of football, really, as I wasn't interested in Welsh domestic football at the time that Neath had fallen away, but I do agree that perhaps you might see more clubs amalgamate now. You might see more teams pooling their resources together to become one club, and that's where I think is a bit more flexible in Welsh football, in that you want your community represented, and you wouldn't see in the professional game, for example, Cardiff City and Swansea City merging, but perhaps in the Welsh game you might see that more now, because clubs are going to have to decide whether do you continue the club and build a better infrastructure, and more people are working at a club. So with the changes, so I imagine the changes for Welsh football what might see another leaf because clubs might fall to the wayside. It's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because I would like to see more clubs, for example, I don't know, having a first team, a reserve team, an under-19s, all with coaches of a high level, all of the teams being filled, stuff like that. Having a trained media officer, stuff like that, that they can kind of get money out of it, because you shouldn't be in football to make money, but you should be in football that not everything you do is for free. That you kind of you want a reward of success on the pitch. You also want to develop the community, and you want to develop a football club. And that's what I do want to see. I do want to see more people make money out of it and make more out of it, really. And that's the same for me, really. And from my stuff now, is that I like doing stuff for free, but for the website itself as well, is that I need to start making money out of Welsh football. And at the moment we are making money out of Welsh football, but we need to make more. And that only comes with the game being professionalised as well, and people taking it seriously. So we could see, like, for example, press conferences being organised or something, stuff like that.
Final question for you then, Jordan, before we conclude this podcast. Where do you see, or what do you hope for with Clwb Pel Droed in the future, and let's say within 5 years or so?
So for me, for Club Pell Droid, I've had these discussions with a lot of people, and a lot of people seem to think we're this big page, and we have got a good following as such, but we haven't really got the contributors. So for me, I see pages that are similar to us. We can call them our competitors, but we can also call them pages that we collaborate with. But for me, I feel I don't want to swamp up people who cover Welsh domestic football, because obviously people have different beliefs on how things should be run. But you see, for example, Welsh Independence pages being set up and having money donated towards them. They haven't had content created, stuff like that yet. So for me, Clwb Pel Droed's been running for the last 5 years, and we've made money off of advertising, and that's down to our contributors working for free. They've had travel expenses paid for example, in recent years, because we've managed to make a bit of money out of it, and photographers allowing us to use their images. But for me, I want to see more people join us, and this is a call to arms, really, to say to people now that as big as you think a Clwb Pel Droed is that, for me, this isn't the end goal. Like, for me, like, ideally, I've seen the likes of the Lad Bible Sport and that, like, make so much money. That's like literally a profession for everyone now. So there's no reason why a Clwb Pel Droed can't make money, and why it can't be a job for someone. We could rent out office spaces, for example, stuff like that. But it all comes down, really, to whether people really want Welsh domestic football to be what it is. Like I say, I don't want to swamp up the competition. I don't want to swamp up everyone else. So it's only a Clwb Pel Droed doing Welsh domestic stuff. But for me, I would like more writers on our website. I'd like graphics, more photographers, and they get stuff out of it as well. So at the moment, I was running that website alongside my university course, and the interesting thing for me is that I either decide to try and sell a Clwb Pel Droed off and make it a part of another media organisation, or I run it on my own with a good team of collaborators. Really, so that's what I want. I genuinely want, like, I don't know, what the Athletic are doing, where they focus on specific clubs. So we could have a Cymru Premier podcast, a Cymru North podcast. We could also have, like, for example, a Barry podcast and stuff like that. So, like, people, there's something for everyone, really. And there are so many, like, good contributors out there of Welsh football that don't contribute to a Clwb Pel Droed. You have to look at Welsh Soccer Rights, and you have to look at David Collins's magazine, the Welsh Football magazine, where he's been running that longer than what a Clwb Pel Droed has been running for, way longer than us. So for me, I need more information from the past, where we just focus on the past and we tell stories from the past, but we also, the future of Welsh football, we get more people involved so we can tell the stories bigger and better, which will only make Welsh football grow even more, because we've had so many views, so many, like, comments of feedback, just to support Welsh football, and I want it to grow even more.
Well, hopefully it does grow in the future for you, and I wish you all the very best with Club Pell Droid there, George, because it is great for Welsh football as well. You know, I've read some brilliant content on there, brilliant articles, especially with Barry Town in the mix in the mix as well. But I wish you nothing but the best. But thank you so much for coming on the show, Jordan. It means a lot. And again, all the very best with Club Pell Droid.
Thanks, Rhys.
No worries. Take it easy.